Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Haribol. So this evening, the topic is being kind boosts happiness. Why? So this was actually something I spoke on at Mantra Night briefly a week and a half ago. I read a little passage, which I'm going to read to you tonight. It was something my wife shared with me. She had got it from her sister. And it was really interesting and quite touching. It was a story about an extraordinarily wealthy and powerful person and their journey to really discover and find happiness. So I'll begin reading. When Nigerian billionaire Femi Otedola, in a telephone interview, was asked by a radio presenter, "Sir, what can you remember made you the happiest man in life?" So you'd think that's a pretty reasonable question, given that everybody is driven by the constant search for happiness. And you would think a person with more money and power would have more happiness. That's generally the assumption. Femi said, "I have gone through 4 stages of happiness in life, and finally I understood the meaning of true happiness. The first stage was to accumulate wealth and means. But at this stage, I did not get the happiness that I wanted. Then came the second stage of collecting valuables and items. But I realized that the effect of this thing is also temporary, and the luster of valuable things does not last long." So just pointing out 2 things. His discovery was that his experiences of happiness gained through immense wealth and enjoying different things that seemed to glitter and glow, the luster did not last long, and the happiness he experienced, he said, was temporary. Then came the third stage of getting big projects. That was when I was holding 95% of diesel supply in Nigeria and Africa. I was also the largest vessel owner in Africa and Asia. But even there, I did not get the happiness I had imagined. The fourth stage was the time that a friend of mine asked me to buy wheelchairs for some disabled children, just about 200 kids. At the friend's request, I immediately brought the wheelchairs. But the friend insisted that I go with him and hand over the wheelchairs to the children myself. I got ready and went with him. I gave these wheelchairs to these children with my own hands. I saw the strange glow of happiness on the faces of these children. I saw them all sitting on the wheelchairs, moving around and having fun. It was as if they had arrived at a picnic spot where they were sharing a jackpot winning. I felt real joy this inside of me. When I decided to leave, one of the kids grabbed my legs. I tried to free my legs gently, but the child stared at my face and held my legs tightly. I bent down and asked the child, "Do you need something else?" The answer this child gave me did not only made me happy, but also changed my attitude to life completely. The child said, "I want to remember your face so that when I meet you in heaven, I will be able to recognize you and thank you once again." What would you be remembered for after you leave your particular office or place? Will anyone desire to see your face again where it all matters? So I found this to be an incredibly touching story. It was interesting, his talking about the 4 stages of happiness that he recognized and experienced. The first was through the accumulation of wealth. Most people are utterly convinced that the accumulation of wealth will bring happiness, even though, guys, I remember when I was young, the Beatles, happiness, "Oh, can't buy me love," I think it was. Talking about money and all the things you can buy with it, but you can't buy love, you can't buy happiness. Then the second phase, having accumulated so much wealth, he set about trying to collect valuables and beautiful things. So what this is the experience then of beauty, possessing beauty and opulence. It always fascinated me when that period in my life when I was traveling around in these circles of extraordinary wealth, how people have this compulsion that if they see something that's extraordinarily beautiful, they feel like, "I have to own it." And somehow by owning it, the qualities of that object, whether it's glorious or beautiful or whatever, is somehow going to rub off on you. It's kind of like the idea people have of wanting to hang out with a cool kid, some person who's considered by everyone to be cool and you want to be their friend, or this idea of being recognized, some movie star or some, music star, whatever, going through an airport and people see them and they want to get up beside them and do the selfie thing, "Please, can we take video?" And it's just like, then they want to show it to all their friends in the hope that somehow that person's stardom and fame and beauty or whatever, sort of, they gain a little bit of that by that association. So that's often the mentality that we all have. And when people acquire large amounts of wealth, they often set about trying to acquire and accumulate beautiful and opulent things, with, of course, the idea that somehow that's going to transform your life or your life experience. Then his third thing was, he described it as getting big projects. But here, big projects is like, what? He was the biggest vessel here, meaning like gas and petroleum tankers and ships. He was the biggest vessel owner in Africa and Asia. And in Asia, I know of some really, really big ones. And it's like, wow, he was bigger than everybody. Plus, he controlled 95% of all the supply of diesel fuel in Africa, which is just, that's huge. So what people, this kind of like a mixture of things that go on when people try to get really, really big projects. There's a desire there for fame, but there's an attraction to this idea of power, becoming powerful and highly influential. And after he had gone through this phase, he also, the experience was that it was not lasting. Then, of course, the fourth stage that he talked about, which completely moved him, and he said helped him to understand what happiness really was. And that came from engaging in acts of kindness. And it's not about, for him, the cost of 200 wheelchairs is nothing. That's just like small change for him. It's nothing financially. His friend was incredibly intelligent in that he obviously was, interested in his friend's well-being. And so rather than just take the wheelchairs from him, and he insisted that he come and personally hand them over to the children. And of course, that changed this guy's life. It changed his experience. One of the things I came to realize, in that period in my life, I knew it theoretically before, since way back when I was a monk, that chasing happiness is something very ephemeral. Nobody seems to be able to actually get hold of it in this world. But one of the things I realized after, some close association with incredibly wealthy people, kings and queens and stuff, you recognize that when people are very poor, and I spent most of my life in a third world country where people have very, very little, their struggle for existence is incredibly hard. Most people in the Western world couldn't live the way people in the third world live, especially the ones in the lower 1/3 or 1/4, the lower economic strata. And most people would think that life is incredibly miserable. But my experience was that these people easily smiled, and they derived some experience of happiness from what we would call the small things in life that were small in financial value. They weren't like, this whole extreme thing where people do extreme sports and extreme gags, and people think that, you've got to keep turning up the volume to get the rush. Whereas the majority of the world's population can easily find some happiness in the smallest of things. But you'll see amongst these people, there is this aspiration, if only I could do this or have this. So somebody that walks everywhere or rides, this real cheap and rinky-dink public transport that exists in the third world. They think if only I could get a bicycle, then I'd be really, really happy. But as soon as a person gets a bicycle, it doesn't take very long before they're thinking, wow, if only I had a motorbike, even a scooter to get to work and get around. And so they work hard and save up for that. And they're thinking, while they don't have it, they're thinking, if only I got that, my life would be that's it. Everything would be going really great. But once they get it, it doesn't take very long before they're thinking, wow, I think I really need a car so I can bring the whole family with me. You see the families in Asia and Africa, where you've got mum and dad and 3 or 4 kids all piled on one little motorbike, and it's kind of like a pyramid of people there on an outing on the weekend or going somewhere. So they think, wow, if only I had a car, I would be happy. And they'll settle for almost, something that most people in the Western world wouldn't even, want to go near. But as soon as a person gets a car, then they start thinking about a better car. There's sort of no end to it. There's always this looking for that thing that will bring me the fulfillment and the happiness that I want. So you've got people that dream. If only I could do this, I would be so happy. And their ideas are theoretical. People that have actually acquired vast amounts of wealth, they can do anything that they want. And their experience is, when you speak to them alone, their experience is one of great disappointment. Because it was there was this promise that if I could just get there, then everything would be just amazing and fantastic. But you hear all these stories of movie stars and, big names in the music industry who have these so-called breakdowns, I can remember years ago reading about Madonna in Paris on a world tour. And she went into this massive depression and locked herself in a hotel room and wouldn't come out and wouldn't pull back the blinds and wasn't eating. And it was everybody was so worried about her. And it's you have everything. People adore you. They chant your name. They throw money at you. People just come to your concerts and spend so much money and for your merchandise. You may have a good voice. You may have an actual talent. You may have physical beauty. And yet you can be so incredibly depressed. And it comes from the experience of having had that sort of promise. If only I could get there, everything would be so happy and fantastic. But then you get that stuff. It's like holding a handful of sand. You can't keep it in your hand. It just leaks through your fingers and you end up with nothing. Your handful of sand or water quickly dissipates and disappears. And so what this gentleman was talking about is real. Anybody that says, oh, it's easy for you to say that, meaning the people that have got money, because you've got everything. People that have that kind of attitude they can't separate themselves and their dream from somebody that's having a real experience. One of the things that amazed me, and when I was doing all that traveling around to palaces and everything, was the number of people in this tier of society that have alcohol and drug problems, even though they've got everything. It's kind of like, wow, it's really, really sad. And of course, it always reminds me of Mick Jagger way back when. I can't get no satisfaction. And I tried and I tried. You know, that was like a #1 hit. I can't get no satisfaction. And these guys were the ultimate hedonists. He's not just making up something. They're talking about their experience of all the fame and the money and all the women and all the drugs you can think of, and, you know, just the extreme wild parties, just like non-stop. And he's singing, I can't get no satisfaction. And I tried and I tried. Why aren't we satisfied? You know, this is a big question. But then you have these experiences, these moments in life, like this gentleman from Nigeria that we spoke of, where they have an opportunity to touch someone's life in a meaningful way. And it doesn't have to be a big financial cost or anything. It may have no financial cost to it at all. But to touch somebody's life in a meaningful way, to show somebody kindness, particularly when they are in great need, it brings about an experience that's almost indescribable. It's not like everybody starts cackling and going crazy and just laughing and, you know. There is this like very powerful, warm and fuzzy, for want of a better description, experience that happens within people's heart, you know, deep within them. And it's really, really uplifting. It's a far more wonderful experience of happiness than all the other things that this guy talked about. And of course, the big question is why? Why is that? Why does kindness, like the title of the talk, I said, why does kindness boost happiness? Why do you get this shot of happiness and fulfillment when you show kindness? It's a really good question, and it's a deep question. From the point of view of the yogi and the transcendentalist, all shades of self-centeredness and selfishness are actually contrary and run counter to what is the nature of the soul itself. As eternal spiritual beings, our spiritual nature is to be giving, not taking, to actually give, to serve, more particularly to serve, and to be bound by an experience of great love. That is our spiritual nature. Material consciousness has the effect of utterly covering the soul, the spiritual being, and contaminating our original spiritual consciousness. And this consciousness becomes perverted and very self-centered. And so even just an ordinary person tends to see everything in relation to themselves. what I want, what I like, what I don't like, my family, my partner, my husband, my wife, my children, my car. We see all this stuff and all these relationships in relation to me, and whether I think it's going to offer me something of value or not, and something that irritates me or displeases me. I don't like it and I push it away. But in this state of consciousness, even if I'm fundamentally a good person, just from the point of view of not doing really bad things, still I can be utterly self-centered. When this guy gave these gifts, what was harder for him than buying the wheelchairs and giving them was going there. His time was infinitely more valuable financially than the cost of those chairs. So there was a sacrifice for him to go do this. But he had that experience of helping those in need. And it transformed his life. He says it's completely changed his life. And it brought him, obviously there is some religious sort of connotation there with what the child said to him. And it made him think about his eternal welfare. And as soon as you start going down that road, you realize how things of this world are truly meaningless in the sense that they are temporary. But I am eternal. I am an eternal spiritual being. So the great yogis and spiritual teachers talk about the reason that we have this nature. It's because we have a natural connection to the Supreme Soul, the Lord of our heart. I've mentioned before in one text, from the Brahma Samhita, how this bond between the living being and the Supreme Being is eternal. It is an eternal bond of kinship. I mean, that's an amazing word. Kinship. We are related. There is a natural and eternal relationship there. And we are most happy when we are engaged in attempting to please this great object of our love. So I'd like to read a verse. It's from the Bhagavata Purāṇa that addresses this. And it goes, as soon as irrevocable loving service is established in the heart, the effects of nature's mode of passion and ignorance, such as lust, desire, and hankering, disappear from the heart. And then a person is established in goodness, and he becomes completely happy. So this is a really profound idea. This was spoken by a great sage. His name was Sutta Goswami, and he was invited to speak to a large gathering of great sages. This was about 5,000 years ago at this very holy place, Namaisharanya. These sages had gathered together to perform a great sacrifice in order to try and benefit and to consider how best to benefit the people of this world so they can become happy. And in questioning him, Sutta Goswami speaks And this is from a really amazing chapter in the Bhagavata Purāṇa, but about this reality that when this, and the term is irrevocable, meaning that it is not, we are not talking about an activity or an emotion of the mind or something of the body, but we're talking about the reestablishment, the reabsorption in our eternal nature. As soon as irrevocable loving service is established in the heart. And it talks about how the effects of the modes of passion and ignorance become evaporated, and a person becomes established in what's called the mode of goodness. And they are able to experience complete happiness. Then from another verse I will read, this one is from the Bhagavad-gītā. Thus, the self-controlled yogi, constantly engaged in yoga practice, becomes free from all material contamination and achieves the highest stage of perfect happiness in transcendental loving service to the Lord. So these are verses that really confirm this state, the state of being that is our most natural state of being, the state of being of the spirit soul itself, the Atma, the self. There are many stories in the Vedas of people that have experienced or were born to unbelievable wealth and opulence and power, members of royal families who make the same kind of discoveries as this gentleman that we spoke of earlier. And when there is this awakening, I mean, when they actually have that experience of perfect spiritual happiness and the awakening of spiritual love and knowledge which arises from this experience, they look back at their life and they look back at all their desires and the things they valued and chased as being very paltry, of having little to no value. There was one very famous king. His name was Dhruva Maharaj. And as a young boy, he had the most extraordinary spiritual experience and became fully spiritually enlightened. And looking back at the state of consciousness that he previously lived in, he states the following: because of my state of complete foolishness and paucity of pious activities, although the Lord offered me his personal service, I wanted material name, fame, and prosperity. My case is just like that of a poor man who, when he has satisfied a great emperor who wanted to give him anything he might ask, out of ignorance asked only a few broken grains of husked rice. Sometimes, our spiritual teachers have commented it's like holding something in the highest value, looking at it as if it was like the most valuable gem or gems. But then later, when a person is spiritually awakened to realize they were simply like broken pieces of glass, little bit of glitter, but they do not give us what it is that we are really looking for. In yet another verse from the Bhagavata Purāṇa, from the 11th canto, the 8th chapter, 31st verse, another person made the following statement: I am such a fool that I have given up the service of that person who, being eternally situated within my heart, is actually most dear to me. That most dear one is the Lord of the universe, who is the bestower of real love and happiness, and the source of all prosperity. Although he is in my own heart, I have completely neglected him. Instead, I have ignorantly served insignificant men who can never satisfy my real desires and who have simply brought me unhappiness, fear, anxiety, lamentation, and illusion. And these are such powerful statements that arise from not theoretical thinking or philosophical thinking, if I can use that term, but genuine experience in their life. Just like the gentleman that we began this talk about, whom he said that it was when he went there and looked at these children and the way that they responded to his gift of a wheelchair, the happiness on their face and what that did for him. This is a real experience. It's not theory. And he said it changed his life. You know, we would be fortunate to be in such a situation where we can look at things with great clarity and not be our mind covered by this illusion and this wishful thinking. If only I could get this, if only I could have that, I would be happy and everything would be wonderful. You know, to actually have everything and see that it's not wonderful can really enhance this true experience of happiness. We have a need, a spiritual need for selflessness, to serve others. One of the great spiritual preceptors in our lineage, who is considered an incarnation of God, an avatar, the great Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he instructed that it is the duty of every living being to perform welfare activities for the benefit of others with his life, wealth, intelligence, and words. By his work, thoughts, and words, an intelligent man must perform actions which will be beneficial for all living entities in this life and the next. So the concept, the understanding of service to others from a spiritual perspective is not only to provide temporary relief from some suffering. You know, the transcendentalists would look upon, for instance, the crippled children that were given wheelchairs. They would look upon them on two levels. One level is on the material level, that the body is damaged, that their mobility is very limited, that their life is extremely difficult because of it. And so if I give them a wheelchair, I can aid this person for the rest of their life, at least make their life a little bit easier. But a transcendentalist knows that the time that that person will spend in that particular body is limited, and that the life in that body will come to an end, and the person, in all likelihood, will be forced to take another birth and to experience material existence once again. Sometimes in that cycle of repeated birth and death, one is in what's considered a good situation, and in other times one is experiencing a very bad situation. So it's not that the good situation, so-called, is desirable, because it often leads to this continuum of birth and death and bad situations. So while a spiritually intelligent person would seek to help as much as possible people in need, there is this underlying appreciation and understanding that the greatest gift I can give them is to help someone reconnect with their own spiritual identity and with the Lord of their heart, the Lord Paramatma. And when that person is elevated to the position of being completely selfless and lost in the most profound spiritual love with their eternal soulmate, and that love is manifest both in their service to that all-beautiful personality of Godhead, but it also overflows to all of his children, all other living beings. That experience is the experience of the topmost happiness. There is nothing that exceeds that. And I'll just read one more verse, the final one, where it speaks about that spiritual condition and the nature of the happiness, the ecstatic happiness that one experiences in relation to it. Pure loving or devotional service to the Lord is so sublime that one can easily forget the happiness derived from material enjoyment, material liberation, and mystic or yogic perfection. So, one of our great spiritual masters from about 500 years ago, he would quote some examples, and he talked about how there are a category of yogis that seek spiritual liberation, and their idea of it and their experience of it is to merge into this vast ocean of spiritual light and energy called the Brahma Jyoti, this ocean of light. And that experience brings what is considered limitless happiness. And it is said that one who has had that experience no longer have any attraction to anything in this world. In fact, they would look at some of the activities that people find happiness to be actually quite distasteful. And yet it is said that that spiritual experience, that form of spiritual liberation, that the amount of happiness one experiences there is like the amount of water in the imprint of the hoof of a cow. That much water compared to the ocean, and the ocean being the experience of limitless transcendental happiness. From my reawakening my eternal loving connection with my eternal soulmate, and to engage in his loving transcendental service, which automatically overflows to all other living beings. So we ask, why kindness boosts happiness? It's because it is the very first, well, I won't say very first, it allows us to even briefly reconnect with what is actually our deeper spiritual nature. Once we are completely immersed in our eternal spiritual nature, and that is the life that we are living, then we have attained the highest transcendental perfection, the greatest happiness that one can ever experience. With that, I thank you very, very much for giving me the opportunity to share this with you. You know, I have taken to using these these quotes from spiritual texts, partly for the reason of sharing with you that these things are not just ideas. They're not my ideas for a start, or they're not something that somebody has just thought up. There is a vast tradition of limitless numbers of transcendentalists that have all attained full self-realization and God-realization. And they all confirm what that experience is. And that those experiences are also confirmed and recorded in the Vedas and the ancient yogic texts. And my hope is that when you hear these and reflect on them, and maybe go back and look at this again from time to time, that they will become more imprinted upon us, and we will be more compelled to, or deeply drawn to this inward great spiritual journey where the highest experience of happiness can be had. So thank you very, very much. Hari Bol. Let us chant for a short while. I have to think what I'm going to chant. 1 second. I'll chant Hari Bol Nitai Gaur mantra, and then maybe Om Hari Om mantra. Thank you very, very much for joining us, and hoping that we will all take this topic very seriously, and in our life really make conscious effort to show kindness. If you can do it daily, so much the better, even once a day, to consciously engage in a kind act. We will be much better for it, and the world will be a much better place. Thank you. Haribol.